Welcome everybody to the Hot Tag Hooligans Wrestling Podcast Show with myself, Ehren and Tom. Earlier last month, we mentioned to everyone that we were going to come back and do another top 5 list. And to help us do it this week, it is Aaron Silvers joining us again. And for the first time, some people may have seen him performing with Happiness Jones. That's the one and only JR Huffman. How's it going?
I'm doing good. How are you guys?
Doing
Well,
well. Tonight's topic is the top 5 tag teams of all time. And this should be very interesting just because the age difference between some of us, some people may not have seen some of the teams in their glory days and kind of saw them at the tail end of their careers when they weren't being pushed as well. And then, of course, just what we kind of like and how we feel. So, JR, you are the guest of the show tonight since Aaron's already been on before. Sorry, Aaron, you've already been knocked. But
It's all good.
we're going to let you start off with your number 5 top tag team of all time.
all right. So this one, of course, I follow you guys pretty religiously, and I hadn't heard this name mentioned very much. But I'm going with Harlem Heat for my number 5 pick. They just, especially with Sherry Martel with them in their corner, it was just a great combination. They always overcame adversity and always seemed to be able to get the titles back, whether it be through injury or whether it be through feuds and storylines. But I had to pick Harlem Heat as my number 5 tag team of all time.
I mentioned Tom yesterday that you would put Harlem Heat on your list. I don't know if Tom remembers that. I don't know. I just felt that way. And it just kind of brings that genre. I was always a huge Harlem Heat fan growing up. Booker T was one of my favorites through my high school days. They didn't make my top 5, but I think they have 10 tag team title reigns in WCW alone. Definitely a great brother duo. If we were having a top brother tag team duo all the time, I could see them being as one of the top 5 of that as well. Tom, your thoughts on his Harlem Heat?
I as most of y'all know that watch the show, I was never a WCW guy. I was very anti WCW, so I did miss out on a lot of that in its heyday. So, it's one of those things where you go back and you try to watch, and they're a phenomenal tag team. They did not make my top 5, but I will say that it's very hard to do a top 5. And if I did a top 10, I would say 5 of them could be interchanged in several positions. So it's one of those things where they're right there neck and neck with some of my favorites, even though I wasn't necessarily a fan at the time because I wasn't watching.
Aaron, your thoughts on Harlem Heat?
Yeah, I mean, I would agree with Tom as far as I was never a WCW guy. I was always anti Nitro and always Raw. But it was one of those things where Harlem Heat stuck out regardless. You knew that Can I Get You Sucker when that come on. He's going to see them with Sherry Martel, Teddy Long, Colonel Parker at one point. Always with a great manager that really fit the bill to help them with a little bit of the mouthpiece part of it until they got the ropes of it. But Harlem Heat's definitely one of those ones that sticks out to me. Didn't make my top 5, but I would agree with you all that it probably could make my top 10.
Man, you guys missed out a lot though with the WCW. No, give me not all that WCW stuff was great. It really
Right.
was. But man, there was such good stuff back then. That's the thing. I never chose sides. I was just like, I'm watching wrestling. Wrestling's on. I'm watching wrestling. So, yeah, like I said, didn't make my top 5, but definitely one of my favorite tag teams of all time. Tom, you're number 5.
So my number 5, I got some heavy hitters I feel like on my list, but my number 5, I went with the Lucha Brothers. And the reason I say that is I feel like you could drop them in any era and they would steal the show. I mean, they just bring something that's different, and what they can do inside that ring is special. And they also have a killer look, and they're very toyetic. So they made my top 5.
Yeah, definitely one of the better tag teams going today when they're being used correctly is the Lucha Brothers. Didn't make my top 5 either. That's actually kind of surprising there that you went with the Lucha Brothers there. JR, your thoughts on the Lucha Brothers?
Well, it's funny you ask. That's actually my favorite current tag team right now is the Lucha Brothers. I do love them, but when you're thinking generational and you're thinking all time, just like Tom said, if we'd had a top 10, they would have been in there for sure. But I had to kind of go back and then switch around. The Lucha Brothers are top notch, and I love the plug and play where you can put them in just about any company, in any genre as well.
Ehren, Lucha Brothers?
Yeah, yeah. So I'll talk a little bit more about them in a little while, but I will tell you that I'm not shocked that Tom mentioned the word toyetic, because I agree they're very toyetic. They're probably going to have a lot of figures over the years. They've already started with several, but they're a great tag team. Anytime they're on the show, I've got to watch, whether it's the first, middle, or last of that show. Lucha Brothers, I've got to see it. I can't go get a drink or snack break during when they're on that TV. I've got to watch them because you never know what they're going to do, and they're quicker than a hiccup, if you will, is what JR calls them. So, but I love the Lucha Brothers too.
All right, for my number 5, I actually cheated. So this is, but you'll understand it when I say this because I feel like these two tag teams go hand in hand, and it was hard for me to kind of pick it. But I'm gonna go with the Midnight Express and the Rock and Roll Express at number 5. And the reason why is because that feud lasted for decades upon decades. And when you looked at everyone that was involved in that, even from Dennis Condrey to Stan Lane to Bobby Eaton's version of Midnight Express, and then of course Ricky and Robert, it was just so hard. I feel like the Midnight Express was just the perfect villain for them with Jim Cornette always out there stirring things up. And I felt like Ricky Morton's probably one of the best baby faces in the history of pro wrestling. I mean, girls were crying every time he was getting bloodied up and beat down. And I think that they're just generational where so many tag teams through the years kind of took monikers from both of them. You look at teams like FTR and stuff like that. They love that old school wrestling style of the Rock and Roll Express. And they're what tag team wrestling's all about, them and the Midnight Express. So I just made it as a tie. It's the only tie I have, so I don't think I'm doing this for everybody. But for me, that is my number 5, is the Expresses. There you go, the Expresses. Ehren, you're number 5. Or y'all's thoughts on that?
Yeah, so I'll give my thought on that real quick. So I can't agree with you more. That has to be a tie. I don't know that you can put one above the other because you can't have one without the other, in my opinion, when you think about their rivalry over the years. So, I mean, I agree with the tie. Can't say that it goes with the rules, of course, but definitely go with the tie. My number 5 is probably one that nobody else is going to mention on theirs. I'm going to go to another organization over TNA Impact, Beer Money Inc. Beer Money, number 5. They great gimmick. They always had a lot of fun. They were kind of, in my opinion, they got a little bit of the Steve Austin type genre, if you will, in Impact. They were out there beer drinking, having a good time, and kicking ass at the same time. It was just fun to see Beer Money out there, especially when they joined forces with Flair and got into that with AJ Styles and all those guys. But Beer Money, when you hear that "Sorry About Your Damn Luck," that did it for me. And seeing them what they did every week, so I love Beer Money.
Tom, your thoughts on Beer Money?
Beer Money's great. I always did love Beer Money, and James Storm is such a great guy. Was able to meet, me and Ehren actually met him in our store, and got to talk to him. Just a great guy. I would definitely say they're in my top 10. However, they did not make my top 5. But absolute great gimmick and great worker. Bobby Roode is one of the greatest workers in the world, in my opinion, as far as just in-ring working. So, yeah, very, very good selection.
I feel like when they came up with the Beer Money gimmick, I'm not sure that they understood it was going to take off the way it did, but they were a perfect yin to the yang, with each other, and James Storm and Robert Roode, just because the characters were so different, and it just really worked out well for probably one of the better teams in TNA history, I would say. So it made my top 5. JR, your thoughts on Beer Money?
Well, I do love that pick. I didn't know anything about Beer Money till about 4 years ago. One of my good friends passed away from cancer a couple of years ago, but I was talking to him about Bobby Roode's character in NXT. He said, "Well, you should have saw him in Beer Money." And I'm like, "What's that?" He said, "Here, let me pull up YouTube." So I had to do my homework, and I watched a lot of matches with them. I was really impressed. I missed a lot of wrestling during those times with Impact and TNA at its height. So I had to kind of backtrack and do my homework. Beer Money's a solid pick. I really like that.
All right, you're number 4, JR.
All right. Well, you kind of stole my thunder, but I have to put them in there, and I've got a quick backstory for that. Midnight Express. I would love to put both. I didn't know we was going to have a clausable put in there, but
Around the show, we I make the rules up sometime.
Sure do.
Yep.
Sure do. It's like playing somebody's basketball court. They can change the rules of horse if they want. Midnight Express and Rock and Roll Express is one of the greatest feuds I've ever seen in my life. I've seen it live. I've watched it. I've watched TBS. I watched Georgia's Championship Wrestling ever since I was a little kid. I cut my teeth on Mid-South. So I saw a lot of those there, a lot of those feuds. I saw the build. I mean, FTR developed their music after them. I mean, if that's not some kind of show of respect of what type of, impact or legacy they've left. I mean, what does it? But the Midnight Express with Jim Cornette and those interchangeable parts they've had, that had to make my number 4.
Anybody else got any thoughts on the Midnight Express? All right, Tom, you're number 4.
So my number 4, we're going to a very new team as far as, if we're looking at the grand scheme of things. So for me, it's the Usos. I absolutely love the Usos. They were fantastic as baby faces with the whole, Samoan get up with the face paint and just really took their career off from there to make themselves great heels. And then they're doing some of the best work ever in the bloodline right now. And they're still young. They still have a long way to go, and they've already cemented a legacy that is most definitely Hall of Fame worthy. So I have them at number 4.
Ehren, your thoughts on the Usos?
Yeah, honestly, they definitely would have made my top 10. I mean, they barely missed my top 5, to be honest with you. The Usos are great. I think they're another one of those that's pretty interchangeable as far as eras go. They are top notch today. They really are. If we just looked at today's tag teams, I think they would be a top 2 for sure. Good, bad, or ugly gimmick, whatever they've been given, they've done great with it. They've made it gold. They're one of those teams that you can say whatever they do, they're going to make it gold, whether it's ugly or not. So if that makes sense. And I just love watching the Usos. So great pick, Tom.
JR, your thought on the Usos?
Oh, I love the Usos. I couldn't agree more with Thomas and Ehren. They are absolutely. I would pick them number 1. They're the number 1 tag team. I mean, right alongside Roman Reigns being probably the number 1 wrestler in the world, I have to put them up there at number 1. As long as they've held on to those titles, the different of storylines that they've been in and out of. They've been singles wrestlers. They were against Roman. Now they're with them. And again, very interchangeable characters, and they just keep getting better. I mean, they came out, they had the Samoan look, they had the tribal, kind of thing, and then they keep interchanging, and I couldn't agree more. That's a great pick.
Yep, good pick. I'll get into them a little bit later. Number 4 for me. I may catch some flack on this, but it's the Hardy Boys. Maybe some people think that they're a little bit higher. For me, their innovation is what gets them at number 4. Match quality for me may not always be the best in certain matchups, but for an era, they have transcended for a lot of generations to come. From our podcast, we hear people talk about how they got into wrestling by watching Jeff Hardy. Jeff Hardy's their favorite. Matt Hardy, the Hardy brothers. Them going out there in those ladder matches, and I get there was 2 other teams with them 90% of those ladder matches, but it was the Hardy's Daredevil tactics being brought over to WWE TV that really elevates them to my number 4 spot. Thoughts?
So I'll tell you that. Go ahead, Ehren.
Yeah, so as far as Hardys go, I can't disagree with you about their Daredevil style. They've been a part of a series of great moments over the years. If you see any highlights over the years at all of any major pay-per-views, especially late 90s, early 2000s, Hardys are there. They're a part of every big ticket show. So I can't disagree with you on the Hardys. I have some mixed feelings about today's Hardys, which I won't get into that on this podcast. But Hardy's overall for their career, I can't disagree.
Yeah, today's Hardys it isn't anything like. If some people are only seeing today's Hardys, I feel sorry for you.
Yeah.
So definitely, I'm talking about as a whole.
Yep.
JR, your thoughts on the Hardys?
I love the Hardys. I think they're pioneers. They borrowed a little bit of the flash and the bandanas and things like that, but they took it to a whole new extreme level when they started. They were the high flyers. You had one that was a mad technician, no pun intended. But they were a lot of elements there that put it all together that was really entertaining, very high velocity, very high impact. And I've loved every storyline at the Hardys when they came out and, throughout their career that they've been in. Love the Hardys. Good pick.
Fantastic tag team. This goes back to what I said at the beginning about how several of them I feel like are right there neck and neck and made it very tough to make a top 5. They did not make my top 5, but there are so many good tag teams. But everything you guys said is 100% true.
All right, Aaron, we swing down to you for your number 4.
Yeah, so I'm going to bring up a name that we already talked about a little bit. Lucha Brothers for me is number 4. Again, I've talked about some of the reasons already, but Lucha Brothers, I can't ever turn the channel or get away from the TV when they're on there. They're amazing. They do some wild stuff. You're going to be in for a hell of a show when they're on TV. They're just that you've never seen anything behind the scenes where they've had any kind of trouble. They're just great team to me and very innovative today. And the lucha, as far as representing the lucha, the side of the business, they do well. And I love them. And there's so many moments I could talk about. One of them that sticks out to me the most is, Phoenix off the top of the cage here earlier in the year. That moment, him flying off there, it just symbolizes how great they are. So Lucha Brothers is number 4 with me without a doubt.
JR, anybody else got anything to say about the Lucha Brothers?
Love them. Like I said, they're my favorite tag team going today. I still think the Usos is probably ranked number 1, but Lucha Brothers is right up there. Very exciting. Like Aaron, I can't turn the channel.
All right.
Absolutely.
JR, you're number 3.
My number 3 is a group of brothers we met here recently about a year ago. Great guys. I've watched them ever since they started with her Welcome to the Jungle come out, Guns N' Roses, and it's the Steiner brothers. I've watched them on I've watched a lot of indies matches of theirs, different territories. I followed the Steiner brothers even when they were singles wrestlers. They split up for a while and came back. But Steiner brothers, they were my number 2 until I did a lot of recollecting this week. Talked to Thomas sometime this week. He jarred something loose in me, and I had to bump them to 3, but that's still a solid pick for number 3. And I love the Steiner brothers and a very solid career.
I love the Steiner brothers. They just barely missed my top 5. They could have very easily been 2. It's one of those things. If this was 1994, they'd probably been my number 2 or number 1. The longevity of the tag team is what kind of, there for a while. And Scott had a fantastic career, and so did Rick. Either way, both of them were successful as singles. I think that's what kind of knocks it down for me a little bit. For me, when it comes to the Steiner brothers, but my God, 2 beasts of a men that you would not want to probably see anywhere and mess with, because both of them could actually wrestle. So you basically had 2 Kurt Angles out there. And let's be honest, Scott was, the Frankensteiner, he took it to a whole other level. It was so innovative when he started busting that out. So, yeah, they didn't make mine, but I could very well see where they made yours. Tom.
So they didn't make your top 6.
Yeah, they didn't make my top 6. Yeah, that's right, because there was a tie there. They didn't make my top 6.
So the Steiners are another one of those teams that I wish I could have went back and watched it during the time that they were hot. They're very good. Just going back and watching, I just don't have that attachment to them. And with these lists being as hard as they are, They didn't make my top 5. Is most 100% definitely in my top 10, but not in my top 5.
Ehren, Steiner Brothers.
Yeah, so Steiners are definitely in the talks for top 5. I definitely don't disagree with JR's pick there. Steiners for me, I think I agree with you, Ehren, on their longevity. It was mostly, to me, late 80s, and I could be corrected here, but late 80s and about mid 90s is when they finally kind of started to die down a little bit. Around WrestleMania 9, whenever they faced the Head Shrinkers, is really at their height of WWF, in my opinion. And then they kind of went their separate ways after that when they hit WCW. But again, Steiners are definitely in that conversation for top 5, and JR, I definitely don't agree or don't disagree, I should say.
Yeah, and there's another one of them tag teams that WWE didn't use properly the way that they should have. I don't know what was going on backstage. I just remember them wrestling the Quebecers and losing the title. It was actually on my birthday one year, September 13th, and so I remember that Raw episode. And I just feel like there could have been some backstage politicking. Vince was big back in that day of bringing people in from WCW just to steal them, and NWA just to steal them and do nothing with them or make them look silly. So I think if they would have had that real solid WWE run, like somebody like Tom who didn't watch WCW, only would know him from the WWE, would probably think, "Oh man," but it's tough. Two fantastic athletes, and so yeah, Steiner Brothers, awesome. Tom, number 3.
Number 3, right?
Yep.
New Age Outlaws for me. I just can't say nothing bad about the New Age Outlaws. During the height of the Attitude Era, you have 2 of the wildest people during that time doing some of the funniest stuff, the most entertaining gimmick out there. Couldn't wait to hear them come out. The Road Dogg with his little whatever you want to call it, rap entrance, just fantastic. The chemistry that they had together, just being around each other, I thought was fantastic. Even though they were definitely different people, you put them together and they made something that was gold. And they had one of the longest runs during that era for tag team champions, and it's just one of those things for me that if I were to pick a tag team, if I'm fantasy booking a show and I get to pick a tag team, they're probably the tag team that I'm going to pick. Big fans.
Are you having them wrestle the Acclaimed?
Maybe. Might be a little conflict of interest there.
Yeah, the Outlaws. I mean, just that whole Attitude Era was rocking and rolling, and it was a great time. And they captivated the audience every time they came out, and kind of innovative in a way, the way some of the people like the Acclaim now do. Enzo and Cass did, grab the mic, get the crowd to kind of chant something along with you to help them get themselves over. Great pick. Didn't make mine, but great pick. Ehren, your thoughts on the New Age Outlaws?
Yeah, so I think for me, it's the fact of how they were put together. If you hear their story multiple times, I've heard it, and even in person last year, they were pretty much told backstage, "Hey, we're going to put y'all together." Okay, what are we going to do with this? We don't know each other. We don't do this. We don't do this together. So they were thrown together, and they made it golden. They just went out there. They had fun. They had a blast. They were put with a great group, obviously with DX, but they made it fun. They had a lot of great moments too, in my opinion, whether it was together or singles, regardless. And to the point of facing the Acclaim, I think we're probably going to have AEW mention that they're from the WWF on their show to make that happen.
Your thoughts on the Outlaws, JR?
I'm going to piggyback off of what Ehren said. You had Billy Gunn with the Smoking Guns, and you had the Road Dogg, Jesse James, who was the roadie for Jeff Jarrett. 2 pretty much corny characters, and then you take them in the back, you tell them what you want, and they create the New Age Outlaws. I couldn't have thought of a better pick for number 3. They are definitely, again, if we had that top 10, they would be on there. They were another tag team that once you heard that music hit, oh, you didn't know, you stop what you're doing. You want to hear what they got to say, what they're going to wrestle, what's going to happen. Love it.
And Billy was even doing the rockabilly stuff with Honky Tonk Man there for a while too, which, oh my goodness, it's a miracle that this came to fruition the way it did, and it was good for both those guys. And basically, I don't know if they're involved in the WWE and AEW now if it wasn't for that. They're probably just out somewhere else and jobless. But yeah, definitely one of the best tag teams of all time. My number 3, I think JR is going to respect this one, whether or not he's seen it a lot. Tom, I'm going to know that you probably haven't seen them together, and Aaron maybe, but it's the Miracle Connection. It's Terry Bam Bam Gordy and Dr. Death Steve Williams. It is one of the best badass tag teams of all time, no matter what company they came in, whether it was NWA, All Japan, New Japan. They wreaked havoc, and they're two believable guys. And I know a lot of people will think more about Terry Bam Bam Gordy as far as the Freebirds go, but he really made his name for himself whenever he started teaming with Dr. Death. And anytime WCW or NWA had these tag tournaments, they were always there, always almost near the finals. And the amount of gold that those two men carried through their career is ridiculous. Some of the best tag team 5-star matches and 4-star matches I've ever seen have them involved in it. From Japan, and I wish more people could see them. I wish they were around a whole lot longer than what they were. Both gone taken way too soon. But for me, it's Bam Bam and Dr. Death at number 3.
Yep. So I would say I respect it. Two badass guys, and just I agree with that. I never got to see them much together, to be real with you. I definitely seen them a lot more in singles action. But putting those two together, I mean, like you said, it's believable. They are two badasses that you don't want to mess with. You hear the stories over the years. I'm sure you all have heard the same stories I have of how badass they really are. But again, I can't disagree with you. Good pick.
Yeah.
Oh, I've been waiting to say something. I got excited when you told me about that. I think of these two. When I watched Terry Gordy and I watched Dr. Death Steve Williams, they held back a lot. You could tell because if they gave everything they had and they hit you with something, they're going to split you in two. Either one of them at any time, interchange them out. So you could tell that they backed off a lot, especially when he done that 3-point stance, Dr. Death. When Terry Gordy would do the Asiatic spike, they let off a lot. Those are two guys I would not want to meet in the bar, and they are badasses. And they did win a lot of gold. They were in the Crockett Cup together several times. Excellent pick. I love that one.
Yeah, and the one thing about it, they're two of the best big men in wrestling history. Like they're not slow and sluggish guys. They're agile, they're quick, they're powerful. I mean, they were one of a kind. I would love to see where they would fall in today's pro wrestling. I think that's Terry Bam Bam Gordy right now. I think the WWE would be salivating over. How quick he was and how powerful he was, especially Dr. Death as well. Man, if they were around right now in their primes, man. Tom?
Before my time, bub. I mean, I don't know. They definitely didn't make my top 5. Probably wouldn't have made my top 10. But after listening to you all, I want to go watch some video and take a look at what they did back then. So
I mean, Terry Bam Bam Gordy is a mix between Bam Bam Bigelow and The Undertaker. I mean, it really is. And with such precedence and just one of a kind generational talents in those guys. So this is my number 3. Aaron, you're number 3.
Yeah, so my number 3 is going to probably make another person on this call pretty happy. But I'm going to go with the original Hart Foundation. Bret Hart, Jim the Anvil Knife Hart. Can't beat it. Again, really good mix. You had the powerhouse with the Anvil. You had Bret, which one of the greatest technical wrestlers of all time, still goes today, in my opinion. I don't know of any match he's ever had that's been bad, besides 97. But, that Hart Foundation, it stood the test of time. It evolved over the years, but Bret was always in the mix. I can't keep them off of the top 5. They're just one of those teams to me that stuck out. I've always been a Bret Hart fan. Anvil and being a powerhouse, I've always been a powerhouse fan too. Anybody that's a big burly guy that's a powerhouse that runs through people, that's my guy. normally. So, and also back then throwing in, Jimmy Hart as their mouth for a little while. That was even great. That made it even better. They had the physical part of it, but that mouth at the end, with Jimmy Hart, great. So Hart Foundation for me, number 3.
Yeah, definitely one of my favorite tag teams of all time. Surprisingly, did not make my list. As much as Brett's absolutely my favorite. I love their feuds with the British Bulldogs. Uh, that Calgary group of them and the Bulldogs being implemented into WWE was just electric back in those days. You had a perfect heel manager in Jimmy Hart, and the Anvil's laugh is so iconic. Great pick by you, in my opinion. Did not make my top 5. Would have made my top 10 for sure, but not my top 5. JR, your thoughts on the Hart Foundation?
Oh, I love the Hart Foundation. I've watched them since day one. Jimmy Hart with them, they had all the Hart all in there, the last name Hart tied in there. I loved it. I loved watching them in feuds. I loved it more when they became faces. They were heels. I'm not really a big heel guy when I was a kid. I wanted to root for the good guy. But there was just something about that pink and black attack. I just could not turn against it. I love the Hart Foundation. Definitely my top 10, solid top 10.
Here comes Debbie Downer.
Hey, I am a big fan of the Anvil. And, then there's Brett. So, if you need a good nap or something like that, then you can turn Brett on. But that's just my opinion. I don't know what it is. Just something about him. I don't know. I don't see it. I mean, I see the moves. The moves are great. There's just something about him that I just want to watch something else. But, it's hard to argue that, so many people love them that it's got to be a character flaw in me, but it is what it is. I just, it's just not my thing. Did they accomplish a lot? Yes. Do a lot of people love them? Yes. So you gotta say that, yeah, they're good. They're probably in the top 10 if we're being realistic about things. They're just not my flavor, so they're not in my top 5.
I guess I'll respect that, much as I hate to. Yeah. All right, number 2, JR.
All right, well, my number 2 pick is the Brothers of Destruction. I'm going to tell you why. After 9/11, I went to Bridgestone Arena and I watched Raw. I did not, with everything that happened, I did not know who was going to be on the card. And I had seen the Brothers of Destruction before. And I love Kane and I love The Undertaker, 2 of my favorite wrestlers of all time. Now, when you put them together, they're like the Terry Gordy and the Steve Williams of that time. There was nobody that could really stop them. If nobody wanted them to, they couldn't have been stopped. So I loved everything that they did, putting those parts together. Because the storyline against Taker and Kane, absolute brothers trying to tear each other apart, and then they come together in unity. I just had to put Brothers of Destruction at my number 2.
I was at the Bridgestone right after 9/11 as well. I remember I was at that show, and I thought that they would cancel that show because it was just like the very next week. And so I'm shocked that you said that. I messaged Aaron earlier today, and I said, Tom's going to have the Brothers of Destruction in his top 5. And here you are. You're the one that puts them out there first. I can't believe it. Yeah, I mean, again, two more of the better big men in pro wrestling that are believable in what they do. And the character flaw with the supernatural even made it even more compelling. I felt like even when Kane was pure heel there to start with, people were wanting to cheer for him. And then to finally have The Undertaker come to his, to his side and for them to reunite led to some great and memorable moments. I did not make my top 5. Probably wouldn't have made my top 10 either, but I understand it. Tom, your thoughts on the Brothers of Destruction?
I love the Brothers of Destruction. However, they did not make my top 5.
Can't believe it.
There's just so many good teams. And when I look at the Brothers of Destruction, they're iconic. They look great, very toyetic. But if you look at championship reigns and things like that, how long were they together? What did they accomplish as a tag team? Those are the kind of things that kind of knocked them down a few notches for me. Definitely in my top 10, but not in my top 5, even though they are probably one of my favorites to watch.
All right, you're number 4. You're number 2.
My number 2 is the Dudley Boys. You know, if you think about all the championships that they've won and, you know, how relevant they have had been throughout multiple promotions, I just think they brought something a little bit different that, you know, the extreme part of it, the whole tables is something that it doesn't matter, you know, in 2022 if, you know, an indie show where you have people that are never been on TV before, if someone pulls out a table, you absolutely think about the Dudley Boys. So thinking about all that they have accomplished and what they have left on tag team wrestling, I put them at number 2.
Yeah, I mean, 3D made my top 5 finisher maneuvers of all time, and they are definitely iconic in that sense. Match quality for me is what kept them out of the top 5. I just feel like if it wasn't a ladder match, I didn't get that type of match I was really wanting. And it's no fault of them. They're a fantastic tag team. Even in ECW, some of the matches they had there were really great. I just feel like sometimes the dance partners were better than they were. And that's where I kind of go. I always felt like Edge and Christian were a little bit better at that time than the Dudleys in the ring. And I always felt like the Hardys were better than the Dudleys inside the ring. I don't take away anything that they've done. It's just match quality for me that would keep them out of my top 5. Aaron, your thoughts on the Duds?
Yeah, so I'd hate to say duds, but they kind of are to me, to be honest with you. Without tables, I'm not interested in watching them. They really, to me, my opinion, yeah, they're great. They've had some titles. They've had several organizations they've been a part of, several other great moments over the years, but who else is involved to make those moments great besides them? Yep. You know, that's the thing. They've had some really good, to your point, dance partners. But without the tables, I don't think they'd be the Dudley Boys that they are today. And there's been some matches that have been without tables that, in my opinion, were not that great. So they probably would not be on my top 10, honestly. It's not a knock for Tom's pick at all. We all got our opinions, but the Dudley Boys are just not my cup of tea.
JR, your thoughts on the Dudleys?
Well, I'm a huge ECW, and you'll find out here in a little bit if we do honorable mentions. Hint, hint.
Yeah,
but
I know where this is going.
I don't know if you do or not. You may not know the tag team I'm thinking of, but I do love the Dudley Boys. I love them in all the different areas. But you all kind of brought something to light that I didn't think of. The entertainment value, the spot picking that they did was perfect. But when it comes to match quality, I didn't really think of that. But yeah, it does. Their dance partners did bring them along to complete that pretty well. But Bully Ray, Bubba Ray, whatever you want to call him and Devon together, to put them together, to have the storyline that they were brothers, and then to have the whole family, and it had each person coming into the family. I love that whole thing. Dudley's is a really solid pick, especially for number 2.
All right, my number 2, they've been mentioned before. I think it's the best tag team of the last decade. It's the Usos. Every time they're in the ring, I feel like this has the potential to be. Now, sometimes it doesn't turn out that way. It has the potential to be a great match. And over the last 2 years, with them being with the Bloodline, I think we're seeing more charisma individually. I love what they did with Jay when Jimmy was out, and now that Jimmy came back, you're seeing a different side of Jimmy as well. They're the best brother tag team, in my opinion, in pro wrestling history, and that's my opinion as far as that goes. But for 2 guys, when they first started, you were just kind of like, I'm not quite sure about this, because like Tom said, they kind of came out with they had the face paint at one point. At one time, they were kind of a little bit more corporate, a little bit, too, when they first came with Tamina. But it works, and it works great. And like I said, every time that I see that the Usos are wrestling somebody, I know that they're going to either A, carry the match, or it's going to be a great match. And I'm really hoping we get the Usos versus Sami Zayn and Kevin Owens eventually, because I think that's going to have the possibility to be the match of the year. I feel like that WWE will give those guys their time and they'll go out and kill it. And the Usos have had some good dance partners. Let's be honest. The New Day's up there with their great feud with them. But unlike the New Day, they're tag specialists more than anything. And I think when you looked at the reason why the New Day didn't make my list was because of each one of those guys was a single wrestler to start, and then they were kind of put together. Where these guys have been tagging the whole way through. So the Usos for me are my number 2. And if anybody's got anything to say about the Usos again, feel free. All right. Moving on from the Usos at number 2. All right. Ehren, number 2.
Number 2 for me, I've already talked about them a little bit already, but the Steiners. I put them up high on my list. I put them at number 2. You know, their work spoken for itself over the years. They're, of course, Hall of Fame for a reason. Finally, Hall of Fame. I think it took way too long to put them there. But really, Steiners have been high in my books for years. I watched them in the late 80s all the way up through the mid to late 90s there when they finally crumbled apart there a little bit. But the Steiners, for me, just great. And being the Michigan and actual wrestlers themselves and that kind of piece of things. And then, of course, having the powerhouse Bulldog, the dog-faced gremlin with Rick Steiner, and then Scott getting bigger and bigger over the years. And they're just great. And and even regardless of how big they got, even muscle-wise, I mean, they could still work and move. Scott's a testament to that, But Steiner's for me is number 2. And like I said, we've talked about them a lot already.
Yep. I think there's nothing else to say about the Steiner brothers. Now, 2 honorable mentions apiece. I'm getting the feeling here we're all going to have the same number 1. Well, there's no telling what the hell Tom's about to say. But 2 honorable mentions for you, JR.
All right. So one of my honorable mentions is the Dudley Boys. I had them at my honorable mention. They couldn't make my top 5. I agree. The 3D is one of the most awesome finishers that I've ever seen. But my other honorable mention comes from ECW, and that is the Eliminators. I think they have the absolute best tag team finisher of all time, even better than the 3D. Well, you can super kick somebody and leg sweep them at the same time. Perry Saturn, John Cronus, I'm telling you, that is my absolute favorite tag team out of ECW and one of the most devastating tag team finishers I've ever seen. So those are my 2 honorable mentions.
Okay, and since I mentioned it earlier, I was always a gangster fan as far as that goes. But I thought your ECW pick was going to be Robin Sabu. That's who I thought your ECW pick was going to be. So I wanted to make sure I clarified that. That's who I thought it was going to be. Tom, your 2 honorable mentions.
So the first one is the New Day. Kind of what you just said. They're fantastic. Don't get me wrong, they are. But I look at them more as an act than a tag team. Now, if we were doing top 5 acts of all time, they would definitely be in that top 5 for me. But if you're strictly going tag team, they're not in my top 5. Now, the other one, and the reason it's an honorable mention is because they didn't tag together a whole lot. They did a little in WWE and then a few times in AEW. But had they had a good portion of their time together, I'm just one of those guys that are all in on them. So I may look at it a little bit differently, but the Rhodes brothers, if they were to devote themselves to be a tag team for a longer period of time, they would have most definitely been in my top 5.
Yeah, I like the Rhodes brothers, especially when they were not doing the Stardust and Goldust combo there. That make mine. Understand what you're saying about the New Day. New Day is just so interesting. We could dissect them all day. I think they have overachieved for what they thought, so that's great for them. But my two honorable mentions, the first one is the Outsiders. It's Hall and Nash. When you look at two guys who really changed the industry, whether it's for the good or the better, or worse, it's the Outsiders. And that, I know they didn't tag a lot, but they had a lengthy run there in WCW there towards the end, where they held the tag team titles quite a bit. And for their importance to wrestling history, they were an honorable mention for me. And then the other one for me was Ray Bucanero and Ultimo Guerrero from CMLL and AAA. To me, it's the greatest Mexican tag team of all time, better than the Lucha Brothers in my opinion, because they kind of paved the way. And it's just a generational difference there. 10 years from now, for me, maybe the Lucha Brothers overtake them. But the problem with me with the Lucha Brothers right now, for me, is the booking of the Lucha Brothers. I feel like they get real hot, and then all of a sudden they disappear for months. And it drives me crazy. And I get injuries play a big role in that as well. Need to see a little bit more for the Lucha Brothers. So, Aaron, your honorable mentions.
Yeah, so I'm going to go with one that may shock y'all, but they always were somebody that kind of fascinated me a little bit, was the Demolition. Demolition with Mr. Fuji, and then adding Crush at one point. I definitely like the Demolition. They were in a lot of great feuds over the years. They were also one of those teams that were, they were always heel. As far as I always seen, they were always known as the heels. There was very few times they were not heels. So I do remember some Survivor Series and things, but overall they were heels. But Demolition for me definitely is an honorable mention. And then the other one that I have feuded with one of my top fives, and that's going to be the British Bulldogs. The Bulldogs were great. Dynamite Kid and British Bulldog himself. I mean, you can't have the original Hart Foundation without the Bulldogs, in my opinion. It was one and the other. They had a great feud together, and even adding the Bulldog mascot too. So British Bulldogs is my other honorable mention.
Yeah, and Dynamite's so influential for a lot of the generation in the late '90s. It's sad that his career ended the way it did, because he was a once in a lifetime generational talent as well. And Demolition, I still think, may have the longest reign in WWE Tag Team Championship history. I may be wrong on that. We may have to go back and check that out later. But I think they held the belt for almost 2 years as well, at least a year and a half. And like you said, they were more or less the heels. And of course, they added Crush a little bit later on. And then Fuji, of course, went with the Powers of Pain and the double switch type ordeal. So, two great ones there. All right. Number one, I almost feel like we should just say it together, because I kind of feel it. Unless Tom's going to say somebody different. He'll just say somebody different. We'll let Tom just go first. How about that, Tom? You go first with your number one.
I don't know how anybody could not pick the Road Warriors as number one. When you think tag team wrestling, to me, you think the Road Warriors. You think about a team that, nobody was beating them. They were killers. I mean, just the gear that they come out with the spikes and the look and the face paint. And they were there was just something about them when they come out that you knew somebody was getting beat down. And even though you knew what the outcome was going to be, it didn't matter. You wanted to see it. You didn't care if it took 30 seconds or 25 minutes. You wanted to see them beat somebody down. And, they're synonymous for the loudest pop. Everybody talks about the Road Warrior pop. And that's because of how popular they were and the sound that the crowds made when they did make their entrance. So I don't know how anybody could go anything but Road Warriors number one.
Everyone agree Road Warriors is number one?
Yeah. I mean, Road Warriors LOD all the way. And I mean, I can go on with that, Tom. I mean, you think about Road Warrior pop. We still talk about it today in today's generation. They talk about, oh, that team got the Road Warrior pop, or that return got the Road Warrior pop. And, there's a lot of great pops today, but I still don't think anybody beats the Road Warrior pop. In my opinion, you go all the way back to, scaffolding matches with the Iron Man entrance. You go to the 92 SummerSlam when they come out on their bikes with the golden, shoulder pads. You go to LOD 2000 with Sonny. All these eras Road Warriors, LOD. I can go on about it. I mean, they are just awesome. They always have been. And again, I can't go with anybody else but them at number one.
Yeah, JR.
I remember in the early 80s, I was at a newsstand and I got a Pro Wrestling Illustrated magazine and I saw this tag team, the Road Warriors. And I was like, man, I was like 12. And I thought, they look really scary. I said, but they look really damn cool too. I said, I'd love to see them wrestle someday. And I'll never forget the first time I was watching wrestling on television and I heard that riff of the guitar on Iron Man. And they mentioned that was the Road Warriors. And I almost knocked my sister down trying to get to the television because I wanted to see them when they come into, I think they destroyed the Mulkeys. It may not have been their first match, but they destroyed the Mulkeys several times. And I'm just like Ehren. Absolute the greatest tag team to me of all time. I don't know if anybody ever surpassed that. They changed the game when it comes to professional wrestling for tag teams, in my opinion.
Yeah, and let's don't get it twisted. In the ring, they weren't the best technicians, but by God, you thought when they hit the ring, someone was going to die, and it was the perfect genre of wrestling because in that late 70s, early 80s, a lot of the crowd still believed it was real. And here were two real dudes who, when they came out, like I said, you believed that they were going to kill whoever it was. And some nights they did kill some people. It's just the way it was. And I hate that some people just see them for their WWE. This is another example. WWF didn't push them the way that they should. You know, you give them a stuffed dummy, and then you give them Sonny, and then you give them the alcohol incident. But it's so crazy that their work from like the late 70s until, you know, they got to WWE still holds up today. Without a doubt, the best tag team of all time. And I wish wrestling crowds were that way now because I love watching the old school stuff and especially like the old war games and you're counting it down and here comes, you know, Hawk or Animal entering the cage and they just lose their minds. They just I don't know if there's a team out there today that hit what the crowd would go that nuts for. And so great pick. I figured that's where we were going to go. I thought there for a while that maybe someone would do the thing and have them at number 2 for some serious reason, but when we got to number 1 and no one had mentioned them, I mean, I knew it had to be at a unanimous number. All right. Well, JR, thanks for hopping on with us.
Oh, thank you for having me. It's been a blast. I love this. This is in my blood. I love it.
All right. And don't forget, try to follow JR on the social media and Happiness Jones. You got any dates you want to plug coming up?
Sure do. We're going to be in Henderson, Kentucky at Homer's Barbecue this Friday, October 28th. We're going to be there from 7 to 10. And we're also going to be in Cave City, Kentucky, Saturday, November the 12th at the Dive in Cave City. And that's ran by the Klein sisters, Letitia Klein. She was formerly a announcer in TNA. She is also running for mayor there in Cave City. If anybody is listening to this podcast that's from Cave City, that's I'm not doing a political plug. Just throwing a little bit out there, a little love for Letitia and her family. But we're going to be there from 8 to 11 Saturday, November the 12th, Cave City, the Dive.
Awesome. Ehren, thanks again for always joining us. Appreciate you as well.
Hey, absolutely. I appreciate the invite again. And just like JR, I enjoy this stuff. I mean, I could talk about this stuff all day. I love it.
Next month, top 5 most underrated wrestlers of all time.
Interesting.
All 4 of us are back. We'll have it next month. Top 5 most underrated wrestlers of all time. That will be a very good show, I think. That's going to be all over the place.
That's tough.
That is tough. I'm giving you a month. I'm giving you a month here, okay?
There's a lot of underrated ones.
Top 5 most underrated guys of all time. Tom, as always, thanks so much. For everyone out there, make sure you hit the subscribe button. We appreciate all the support as well. I want to thank everyone who's purchased a shirt recently over at Pro Wrestling Tees. We still got some shirts over there. Pick those up. And I want to thank everyone for helping my book. Today we pray hit number 1 on the bestsellers list. And I appreciate everyone for that. If you haven't got a copy yet, head over to Barnes & Nobles and pick yourself up a copy. I'd appreciate it as well. For myself, Tom, Ehren, and JR, thank you all, and have a good night.